Hey scientists, welcome back. I'm Jessica Power, one of the science curriculum coordinators at Kansas City Public Schools. Now scientists, last week we spent time learning about structures and functions of living organisms. We talked about parts of plants or structures of plants, like the petals, the stems, the roots, the leaves, and we talked about what those functions were. And the reason we talked about structures and functions of living organisms was to talk about how all living things need to survive. And there are some things, specific things, that living items or organisms need to survive. Do you remember what those were? Yeah, they were air, water, food. And then we also talked about how animals needed shelters to survive. Well, we're gonna dive really, really deep, scientists, into a specific structure this week of animals. And that structure is the brain. Now, I'm sure that you know that we need our brain to survive. And last week I mentioned that the function of the brain was to control or regulate the body. Now the brain is the reason that we react to different things. It's the reason that we're able to learn in school. It's the reason we know when we're hungry and thirsty. And it's also the reason that we're able to play sports or read a book or have the temperature or get better when we're sick. The brain is responsible for everything happening in the body. It's like the control center. So we are going to focus today on the 5 senses and how the 5 senses create this stimulus response mechanism, this feedback goes back and forth between the environment around us and our bodies and how we respond. Now scientists, the brain may be the control center, but there's many different parts of the brain. The brain itself, that sits right up top, right here, it's called the cerebrum, and it's broken up into different sections. And those different sections are responsible for different things. Like the very front is called the frontal lobe, and that's responsible for a lot of critical thinking. So a lot of the stuff that you do at school for learning all happens right up here. Now, when we see things, when we take something in, right? So when I'm looking at you in the camera, or when I'm outside taking a walk with my dog, to make sure that I don't trip and fall, I look through with my eyes. Now, anytime we see something, scientists, that actually gets sent to the very back of our head, called this area called the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe is responsible for processing what we see, so that as humans, we can make the decision what to do. So if I come across a large stick laying in the middle of the sidewalk while walking my dog, my brain sees that, sends it right back to the occipital lobe, and my brain goes, hey, maybe you should step over that instead of tripping over it to help keep us safe. So let's dive in. Scientists, we have 5 senses. I'm sure you've heard that. We have sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. And our ability to experience all 5 of these senses comes in different ways. We call those stimulus. A stimulus is what's happening to our body so that we experience one of these senses. So I put down what these stimulus are for each of our 5 senses, because sometimes we don't always think about it. So let's go through them. The first one is sight. Now, if you've ever turned the lights off and there's absolutely no light at all in a room, you might have noticed that you can't see anything. Or when it gets dark outside and there's no lights on, it's a little bit harder. But sometimes there's a little bit of light coming in from outside or from the TV or something, so you can still kind of see the objects in the room, but maybe not the details of them. Our ability to see comes from the ability of our eyes to take in light. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but if you have a chance, try this at home. In your eye, can you see my eye? You have this very, very center part that looks like a black dot, and that's called your pupil. And your pupil actually gets bigger and gets smaller. Now that circle of color around your eye, you can see that mine's blue, that's called your iris. And the iris is a muscle. And the iris's job is literally just to make the pupil bigger and make the pupil smaller. Now, the pupil changes size based on how much light is around you. So if you've ever walked outside on a really sunny day and it hurts your eyes, or in the wintertime when the sun is reflecting off the snow and it hurts your eyes and you're like, oh my goodness, that's because your pupil has started out really big, right, indoors because it wasn't super bright. And once you got outside where it was sunny and there was tons and tons of light, your pupil and your brain were going, oh goodness, and they were shrinking. So your pupil controls how much light is being let into your eye in order to see the things around you. So in order for us to see, there has to be light. Now, hearing. We hear through vibrations or sounds. If you've ever plucked a guitar string and you've seen the guitar string vibrate, that vibration is creating a sound. And that sound travels into our ear and goes through the different parts of our ear. Now touch is interesting. Touch doesn't just happen on your hands. A lot of times when we talk about the five senses, we always use the hands, right? We always say touch. I drew a hand myself. But really, touch happens all over your body. It's really your skin. You have what's called touch receptors, and those receptors take in pressure, temperature, pain, and vibrations. Vibrations. We just talked about that with hearing. Have you ever heard really, really loud music and you can feel the bass or the vibrations in your body? Not just hear them, but you can feel them? That's an example of touch. Now pressure, right? If you've ever given somebody a really hard high five, you might have felt a little bit of pain or pressure. That's being able to feel whatever you're touching. Temperature, you can sense if something's hot or cold. So if you put your hand on a hot stove, your body goes, yikes, take your hand off, that's really hot, because your hand or your skin, wherever you're touching it, has sensed temperature. Taste and smell are connected. Have you ever had a cold? When you've had a cold, you're all stuffy, right? And you can't smell. Well, have you noticed that when you have a cold and can't smell, you also can't taste? And that's because your sense of smell and your sense of taste are connected. Now, we sense or we take in things from the environment differently with taste and smell, but where they're all processed is the very same place. So for taste, substances that break down in water or other fluids, right? So think about water or saliva. When you get that food in your mouth, you can taste those substances on your tongue. And that saliva in your mouth is breaking down that food to later be digested. Now smell is similar, but smell is from substances that are carried through the air. So this time, maybe you've ever sprayed perfume or cologne, or you've been in a different room and you've smelled food, right? Those are from substances traveling in the air for our body to smell. Now, that's great that we take in all these different senses around us and we experience all of our different senses in different ways. However, how they're processed in the body is very similar. Every time we experience something, scientists, through our five senses, our brain figures out what to redo. We always respond to our senses. Like I gave the example earlier, if I see a stick laying in the middle of the sidewalk and I'm walking my dog, she may pick it up, which may not be a problem, but my job is to see that, and then my brain tells me to step over that so I don't trip. If I'm cooking, right? If I'm making something to eat and the pan is really hot, I might have to put on like a glove of some sort so that I don't burn my hand, right? My brain is telling me don't touch that hot object. Now that response comes from our brain. And I brought this poster with me, scientists, so that we could take a look at something called the nervous system. Last week we talked about structure and function, and I talked about the structure, the brain, and how the brain keeps us alive and controls the body. Well, the brain is part of this system called the nervous system. And the nervous system is made up of the brain, the spinal cord, which actually goes down your back. If we come back over to Fred, you see these vertebrae right here? Well, this is actually, there's this open circle at the back of this vertebrae. So there's bone here, and then in the back, there's little open holes. That's where the spinal cord comes down. And then in between, let's turn Fred so I can show you. In between, you might see these little holes right here. These little holes are where your nerves come out of. So nerves, you've got your brain that's in your skull, your spinal cord that runs down your back, and then from your spinal cord are thousands of nerves. And these are the nerves right here. And these nerves go to all over in the body in order to sense different things and allow your body to respond. So a baseball player that's batting, that sees the pitch coming in, their brain is taking in that sight, that stimulus of sight, and it's going to tell the batter to swing, where they swing the bat in response, or get out of the way, or don't swing at all. So, something happens to our body through one of our 5 senses, whether it's sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch. Our body takes it in, and it takes it in and sends that to the brain. The brain goes, okay, cool, this is happening to the body, this is what we're going to do in response. And it sends that message all the way down the spinal cord to wherever that message has to go. If we're playing soccer, the brain's going to send that message all the way down to the legs. If we're batting in baseball, like I said, it's going to send it down to the arms and hands. But whatever's happening to the body, whatever stimulus we're experiencing, our body, our brain, creates that response. So scientists, it doesn't matter if we're humans, it doesn't matter if it's the squirrel crossing the road or the chicken, for that classical joke. It doesn't matter what kind of animal. All animals have some sort of structure in their body that controls what's going on. Now, a lot of times we have like pets, right? We have fish, or dogs, or cats, or maybe goats, or rabbits, or snakes, or lizards. I'm running out of things, right? We have different kinds of pets, and all those pets have a brain. And the brain of that organism tells that organism what to do. It's controlling it, but it also takes in its surroundings. Now, sometimes you might see that. So I know that when I'm at home and the doorbell rings, my dog goes crazy. She starts barking. Sometimes she starts scratching at the door. That's a stimulus of hearing. She hears the doorbell, and her response is, ooh, something's happening. I need to alert the humans in this house, right? So again, there are stimulus, there are things that happen to our body that we experience through our 5 senses, and then our body, specifically our brain, responds to those. Now, there are certain things like reaction times or reflexes. These are types of responses. Have you ever gone to the doctor and the doctor hits your knee and your knee kind of like jumps up a little bit? That's a reflex. That's your body responding automatically. And then there's reaction times, right? How quick do you react to a stimulus that's coming at you or something like that? These are different ways that our nervous system, brain and spinal cord and nerves, are helping us to survive as living organisms. So everything is connected, scientists. 2 weeks ago, we talked about acquired and inherited traits. Things that are learned are acquired traits in our environment. Well, our brain processes those, and we learn how to respond. Last week, we talked about structure and function. We talked about how there are parts of the body that help you survive, right? That function, that have a job that's really important. And this week, we went even more in depth and talked about the brain. And we talked about how there are our 5 senses that take in stimulus, right? Something that we experience in the world through our sense of sight, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, comes into our brain, and our brain figures out what to do. So scientists, as you go through your next week, I want you to pay attention. What are some things that your body senses? What are some stimulus that occur to you or happen to you that make you have to use your sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing? And then how does your body respond? Sometimes it's really interesting to kind of think about, this happened to me and this is what I did to respond. It's all stimulus response and it's all related. Scientists, have an absolutely awesome day and a great rest of your week. I will see you back here next week.